Hey there, y'all, and welcome to episode 4 of Booked with the Cook. Yeah, I've got a new shirt on, and it ain't exactly seasonal, but this is a summer celebrating fantasy, and this here's one of mine. Roll Tide. Not to mention, this thing is comfy. Anyways, just like last week's recipe, we're going to be using an unexpected cookbook, the unofficial book of Hobbit cookery, this time for the honey cake recipe. Just like before, I will leave all related links in the description down below. And guys, these things are fantastic. Seriously, you are in for a real treat. These are absolutely my favorite recipes so far. This week also comes with another little history lesson, and strap in, kids, because it is a doozy. The star of today's show, honey, dates back quite literally to the dawn of recorded history and is one of the oldest and most widespread food sources on Earth. It has antimicrobial properties, meaning that bacteria doesn't typically grow well in it despite its sugary makeup. This means it can last almost indefinitely, making it one of humanity's few truly shelf-stable foods. Seriously, back in 2015, they found pots of this stuff in a burial chamber near one of Egypt's pyramids, and the stuff was still edible. Now, I have no idea who thought it was a good idea to go around trying mummy honey, but you do you, I guess. So as honey is such an ancient ingredient, recipes using it are just as old, including honey cakes, which have been around for literally thousands of years, even as far back, of course, as ancient Egypt as previously mentioned, and some recipes have also even been discovered in the ruins of Pompeii. In light of this esteemed history, how does our modern honey cake hold up? Well, let's get to cooking and find out. For this recipe, you'll need 1 3/4 cups or 220 grams of all-purpose flour, 1 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, a modern ingredient as discussed in our last video. If you're interested in hearing about the history of chemical leaveners, check out the card in the upper right-hand corner. 1/2 cup or 115 grams of butter at room temperature, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 3/4 of a cup or 200 milliliters of whole milk, 1 egg, 3/4 of a cup or 255 grams of honey, and another 1/4 of a cup or 85 grams set aside in a bowl for later. I'm just using a local brand that's available to me, but if you have a particular flavor of honey that you like, feel free to use it. You might also notice that there ain't a stitch of sugar anywhere in this recipe. This is the only sweetener that you'll use for this one. Now, because I always have to change up something, here are the minor changes I've made to this recipe. The original calls for the zest of 1 lemon. Now, you're probably looking at this thing and thinking, Rachel, that's an orange. Well, you'd be half right. This is actually a Meyer Lemon, which is thought to be a hybrid between a lemon and a tangerine. These little guys were brought to the US from China in the early 1900s by a fellow named Frank Meyer. 3 guesses as to what it's named after, and the first 2 don't count. Now, these things are excellent for desserts because it's smaller and sweeter than a normal lemon. And I found that the zest of these things pack a ton of flavor. You'll see how I use this a bit later on, but I don't just stop at the zest. My next change is the fruit component. The recipe calls for 1/2 cup or 85 grams of either dried blueberries or currants, neither of which are available to me right now. So instead, I used an equal measure of golden raisins, which have a lovely mild flavor and are not nearly as sugary as some other dried fruits, and I thought they might pair well with the lemon and honey. Now that we've gathered our ingredients, go ahead and preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, as this stuff is not going to take you long at all to put together. Next, whisk your flour in with your baking powder and your salt. Then it's time to blend in your butter. If it's completely at room temperature, this should be easy peasy if you have a hand mixer or a stand mixer. Just blend away until you have a pebbly looking mix, really similar to our granules from the scones episode. Next, mix in your raisins. Then add the lemon zest. The tool I'm using here is just a simple citrus zester. I got this from Bed Bath & Beyond just for a couple of bucks, and you could probably find one exactly like it at your local grocery store. Now set that aside and mix together your egg, milk, and honey. Make sure you blend the honey in very well, as it likes to stick to the bottom of the bowl. Okay, now here is where I make my last change to this recipe. I'm taking half of this Meyer Lemon and squeezing just a little bit of the juice into my mixture just to give it a bit of tartness, since the raisins I'm using are considerably sweeter than the blueberries or currants that the recipe calls for. After that's done, dump your wet ingredients into your dry ingredients and blend the 2 mixtures together. Now this batter will be a very loose one, looser than any cake batter I've ever worked with. At first I thought this was going to be very similar to muffin mix, but it really isn't. Don't worry though, this will work out wonderfully in the end. The book says just barely free of lumps, and you'll notice that there is some flecks on the side of the bowl here. That's the butter, and those lumps do need to stay. This recipe has been pretty simple so far, but now we're getting to the tricky part. First, we're going to butter our muffin tins. Just like last time, be sure that there's butter in every crease so that the cakes will get nice and brown in addition to not sticking. Then ladle 1/3 of a cup of your mixture into your muffin tins. Make sure to scoop down to the bottom of your mixture where your raisins are hanging out. You'll want about 5 or 6 raisins per cake. Then, stick those in the oven for about 12 minutes. As I've said before, my oven runs a bit cool, so I had to leave them just a touch longer. You're going to want the cakes to be able to firmly hold their shape, but if you put a toothpick in the middle, they're slightly underdone. Once you've carefully removed your cakes from the muffin tin, arrange them on a flat cookie sheet and heat up that reserved honey from before in the microwave for about 15 seconds. This will make it nice and runny for us to glaze the tops and sides of our cakes. Glazing is simple enough. Just spoon your honey onto the tops of the cakes and allow it to just drip down the sides. And be sure to let some pool around the bottom of the cakes. You'll thank me for this later. I am, of course, using parchment paper for this step as well, but you can also use a greased cookie sheet if you don't have any on hand. Once you're done with that, pop them right back in the oven for another 10 minutes or until very golden brown. And with that, you're done! These honey cakes are extremely moist, and even better, you can make these ahead of time and they will last for several days. Just heat them up in the microwave for a perfect dessert, breakfast, second breakfast, you get the idea. That does it for this week's episode, guys. Join me next time for my spin on potato soup. If you have any questions or suggestions on dishes from your favorite stories you'd like to see me try to recreate, let me know in that comment section down below. I'll see y'all later. Take care, guys.